In this video, we're going to talk about functions in Python. A function is a block of reusable code that performs a specific task. It helps make your code cleaner, easier to read, and more efficient. To call a function, you simply write the function name followed by parentheses. And if the function requires arguments, you place them inside the parentheses. Functions are one of the most important concepts in Python, and you'll use them in almost every project you build. Now, imagine you want to display a block of messages in the console 3 times. Without using a function, you'd have to repeat the same code 3 times, which isn't very efficient. Of course, you could also use a loop to run the block multiple times, but the logic would still be inside your main code, making it longer and harder to manage. Here, we've printed our block of messages 3 times, and you can already see how repetitive it looks. But what if I could write this code just once and then reuse it whenever I want? That's exactly where functions come in. To define a function in Python, you use the keyword def, followed by the function name. Let's create one and call it welcome greeting. To invoke or call this function, you simply write the function name followed by parentheses. And that's it. The code inside the function will run every time you call it. Now, let's make our function a little smarter by adding a parameter. A parameter is a variable that you define inside the parentheses of your function. It allows you to send data into the function when you call it. Let's add one parameter called name. Then, inside our function, we'll use that variable in the message. For example, "Welcome to my channel, John." This way, we can call the same function and pass different names like John, Alice, or Bob. Let's see it in action. And here you can see, we have 3 blocks of messages displayed in the console, each one greeting a specific user: John, Alice, Bob, and Charlie. That's the power of using parameters. Instead of repeating code, we can make our function flexible and reusable with different inputs. When you invoke a function, you can actually send more than one argument. Let's say we also want to include the user's age. We'll try calling the function and passing 2 values, the name and the age. For example, John, 15, Alice, 25, and Bob, 35. But when we run this code, we'll get an error because our function is not expecting a second argument yet. To fix that, we simply add a new parameter called age in our function definition. Then, we update the message to include both the name and the age, and test again. Now everything works perfectly. We've learned how to create a function, how to call it, how to use parameters, and how to make our code reusable and cleaner. Now, let's try something interesting. What if we switch the order of the parameters when calling the function? For example, instead of writing John 15, we write 15 John. Let's run it and see what happens. Python doesn't know that 15 is supposed to be the age. It just takes the first value and assigns it to the first parameter, which in our case is name. So it ends up saying, "Welcome to my channel 15, which clearly doesn't make sense. That's why the order of parameters is so important when you call a function. Now, let's look at another important concept, the return statement. So far, our functions only print messages to the console. But what if we want a function to send data back to us instead of just displaying it? That's where the return keyword comes in. The return statement allows a function to give back a value to the part of the program that called it. Think of it like this. When you call a function, you can get something in return, a result that you can store in a variable, print, or even use in another calculation. Here we have a simple function called addNumbers. It takes 2 parameters, a and b, adds them together, and then uses the return statement to send the result back to the caller. When we call the function with addNumbers 5, 3, it returns 8, and we store that value in a variable called sum1. We do the same again with add numbers 10, 7, which gives us 17, stored in sum2. Finally, we print both results to the console. The first sum is 8, the second sum is 17. So, instead of just printing inside the function, we're now returning values, which we can reuse anywhere in our program. That's the power of the return statement. Now let's test our function. We call it twice, first with the numbers 5 and 3, and then with 10 and 7. Each time, the function runs, adds the two numbers, and returns the result back to us. We store those returned values inside two variables, sum1 and sum2. Then, when we print them, we can see the results on the console. The first sum is 8 inches, the second sum is 17 inches. Everything works perfectly. Our function is now reusable, clean, and it gives us values we can use anywhere in the program. Now let's see what happens if we forget to use the return statement. I'm going to remove the return line and just keep the addition inside the function. When we call the function now, Python still executes the code, but it doesn't send anything back to us. So if we try to print the result, we'll see none. That's Python's way of saying there's no value to return. Now let's take this one step further. A function in Python can actually return more than one value at the same time. For example, let's say we want to calculate both the sum and the difference of two numbers. Inside the function, we'll compute both results, and then we'll use the return statement to send them back, separated by commas. When we call the function, we can unpack those results into two variables, one for the sum and one for the difference. Let's see how that works. And there we go. The function returns two values, and Python automatically packs them into a tuple. We can then unpack that tuple into two separate variables, making it super easy to work with multiple results from one function. And that's it for today's lesson. You've just learned how functions work in Python, how to define them, call them, use parameters, the return statement, and even how to return multiple values. Functions make your code cleaner, reusable, and much easier to maintain, and you'll be using them in almost every Python project you build. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next lesson. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.